design and creative management. He's worked for a variety of industries with big brands like Google, eBay, Turner, and Disney. And we're excited to have him here to help us keep our design files so fresh and so clean. I had to do it. We're in Atlanta. I mean, come on. So let's welcome Aaron, you guys. Let's give it up.
Yeah.
Hi, y'all. Um, well, I have to say thank you to Vanna and the ladies at UX for inviting me here. Um, if anybody knows Savannah, she's super, super sweet and probably like the most energetic, get-going person in the world. So when I was saying my file was really fucked up, it was really fucked up, but it was completely understandable because of the time constraints. But if you take steps towards doing this, then you can mitigate a lot of those problems that arise for that. So first thing that I want you to understand that this is a philosophy. Everything that I have here is stuff that I've set up for my own personal workflow to learn to help me get rid of all the extra stuff that's I call paperwork and the stuff that I don't want to think about because I want to make cool stuff, right? Just design, because doing bookkeeping is not something for me. And I hope all of y'all are not bookkeeping and being accountants and pushing paperwork. That's not what I want to do. So just think of this as a philosophy and not as a direct guide, and think about how you can move forward to make things easier for yourself. Again, this is part of a user experience, and that you should think about how you're going to be interacting with your own files and how other people are going to be interacting with them. And knowing that you're giving somebody a file that has layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4 doesn't help them when you're collaborating with them. It doesn't help you when you're looking back at the file. So the importance of keeping it clean is collaboration is considerably easier, right? So when you're handing off a file to someone, like say I was handing off a file to Havana and I've got all of my layers labeled properly. They've got a certain order to them and they're consistent, and this is what she's expecting, then that it's easier for her to go to the next steps in creating things, right? Your iterations are also faster. Where everything is. If you have to move, if you're moving around just text entry fields or whatever, you're going to make those iterations faster because when you look at it, it's clean. It's there's not any ambiguity to what you're looking at. Your deliverables are ready to go too. I always think of it as when I did my time waiting tables. Hopefully all of y'all either had to wait tables. It's a very hard job, but you learn a lot about people. And it gives you a lot of appreciation for the hard work that goes into it. But one thing that I always made sure that has always had my check ready to go, right? So if someone orders something, print the check, put it in your pocket. You're just taking this one step to make your life easier the next time around when they're asking for the check, right? So when your files are nice and clean, your deliverables are ready to go at that moment. You don't have a bunch of junk in there that you got to delete, that you've been put into the side or right off the side of the artboard, because I know you do it. You put like 3 logos off the side of the artboard, right? You keep them there. So keeping that stuff neat and clean is ready to go. So you don't have to deal with deleting stuff when you're done. So when you're done, you're done. You don't have to. And when it comes back to you, because it's coming back to you, it's ready to go. This comes back to revisiting old files. Say someone asks you for something you did 6 months ago and you're like, I don't know, where's this screen or whatever. You can go and look at those files. But it's also when you need to look at something that's old that someone else has already made and someone else is looking at your stuff, because you're going to leave legacy files behind and someone comes back for them. Like, think about that. Would you want to be that person to get this file? I know if it was terrible, I totally wouldn't want to be that person. And this will save you so much sanity. This will keep you sane in so many different ways. One of the things that I like to say is that I don't know, I've slept since then. It's easy to have a stopping point on Friday where you're rushing out the door and it's like 3 o'clock and you're like, you just want to get somewhere real quick, and then you come back Monday and like all that's happened there, you have to resituate your brain to that thing. Then you don't have that spool up time. You don't have to think about how you structured it at that time, because you always have it structured the same way, and everything's labeled, and it's nice and it's clean, so you don't have to go through that over and over again. The first part is your folder organization. I know y'all are super excited about this part. Don't worry, it gets more exciting. What I've always start with is I start with my WIP folder. Always my WIP folder. It's always my work in progress. I'll always have it. It is the basis for everything goes in. I don't stick things in my documents. I don't stick it anywhere else. I don't put it in my downloads. I don't have a bunch of folders on my desktop. If I have a folder on my desktop, it's WIP. It's everything's is there. It's not anywhere else. This is where you're working. You don't go sit down at your desk and then have your keyboard somewhere else, or and your mouse one other place and your headphones another place. Put them all in the same place. They're easy to find. You always know where they are. And under that, I usually break it down as your project or client folder. This is kind of dependent on how you work and the place that you're working at, but it's easy to have multiple projects that you're working on, and having all that stuff in one place is really great. And especially if you're working at agency, you can go back and forth, write that, and there's no guessing about it. And then your project document, of course, this is with the basis of everything that everything's based around, is this one document that has everything in it, be it a Acture file, a sketch file, an XD file. It doesn't matter. It could be an InDesign document. It could be a Photoshop document. It's your main document that everything else goes into. This is where your main work is, and this is the most important file you got there. And then your assets, stick all your images in there. Put all your images in there. Don't put them on loose in the same folder, because when you go back and looking through them and you look at all the stock photography images that you downloaded, because I know you got like 50, and you flipped through them and you decided which ones, and you changed colors on them, and when they're all sitting in the your project where your project document is, nah, it's too much to go through, and it like you don't have to look at that, so your mental space is not even absorbing it from day to day. And then fonts, key. If you're not using specific web fonts and you pick that right font and you actually got someone, you convince someone to pay for it, which is kudos on you, put your font in there. So when a dev comes to you, you can say, here's the font. There's no question if the font exists somewhere else, or you have them all in your fonts folder, or you have a bunch of zip files in your download folders. Just make the fonts folder. It's okay to duplicate fonts. They're not that big. You can also break it down into something bigger. This is kind of more akin to what I do. I kind of get a little anal about breaking things down, and that I go for the wireframes and put all my wireframes in that specific thing, and then research. And then if you're doing research, then I even break it down further and research and have competitive analysis, and even maybe have your screenshots in there too, in your images. And this just separates out everything. So even if you hand this folder to someone else and all your documents to someone else, they can go, oh, okay, this is where your images are. This is where your fonts are. This is all the research that you've done before. And if anybody asks you about your research, you can say, okay, here's my research. It's done and it's over with. Now hold on to your hats, guys. This is file naming conventions, right? This is so thrilling that I want you to stay. Just stay right there, because we're going to start talking about date. This is one of the biggest things for me, is that date formatting on a file. Files change hands, and they change on computers, and they can change, and edited versus created versus modified can be different on a different system from day to day, and it can change. It can change for anybody. And sometimes if you just open it and then close it and you haven't done anything, the date changes on it. So I always organize it by date, and I do year, month, and day. And hopefully this day won't be repeated. Like I think we're on March 411th, 2020. So Hopefully you won't have to repeat that day. And I break it down like this, and it will stay organized, and you can sort it in your Finder or your Windows Explorer, whatever. If you can always sort by name, and it sorts by date. This is absolutely where I start with. It won't sort any other way when you're doing it by name like this, so you will always see it by the date, and you'll know when it's made. You don't have to worry about even the date column or how it changed, or if it's been on an FTP server or sitting in the cloud somewhere. So we'll start file naming with that. The next thing is descriptive. Like, what is it? If you're going to search for it in your computer later, and you're like, I don't know, like, what is it? Think about the idea that you're going to be searching for this file later, and that's the biggest thing is you're going to be searching for it, and you're going to be giving it to someone else, right? So you get a descriptive for it, and you break it down, and you put it as your file name. Then ownership. Ownership is great because especially when you're collaborating with other people and you're handing it off, and you've made a decision about how something should work, and you've handed it off to someone else, and they've made a decision different than what you did, and then someone comes to you and says, hey, why is the decision made? So tagging ownership in the file name, it allows you to know who made the last edit or who created the file. And this should always change when the file change hands. Again, we'll use the Havana example. If Havana gives me a file and she's got the HN on her name, and then it's handed to me, then I will immediately change it. And I usually use initials. Initials are pretty easy because they're not usually the same. But if you have multiple people there, you can always go to 3 initials, and always append it. And it's a minor ownership thing, and especially if you're working with multiple people, it's real easy to get confused on which is version what and who had what. The next thing is versioning. This is, what iteration is it? We all go through versioning. One thing I got to say is never ever use any form of the word final. Just don't do it, because I promise you, if you put final on something, you're going to have changes. And if you're following the same naming convention over and over again, the highest version should always be the newest one. It should be the final version. There shouldn't be an older version that's the final version. So there's no need to label final. Just don't do it. And if you see someone else do it, I think it's fair to ridicule them. It's unreasonable to actually have final on any file, especially if you have final version 2 or final space copy. I like to use alpha because it's better than numeric, and the reason why is that different file systems look at files differently. So if you're using a version, if you're using like version 1 and then version 2 and then so on, and then you get to like version 10, version 1 gets sorted next to version 10. And operating systems have gotten a little bit smarter about it. Windows 10 and Mac OS, they're really good about sorting the files, but this can change if it goes to a server, and especially if a dev's looking at it from one point of view that's different than how you're looking at it, then you'll run into space and things where you're sorting a file and it's sorted differently. So you can have 10 come before 2, and this completely mitigates it. And also this gives you 26 different characters to play with. So I don't think I've ever had at any time in one day making 13 different or 26 different changes. The highest I think I got up to was the letter G on editing a file, and that was a rough day. So I hope you never come across that. So if you still follow the concept of putting a date on something, then it's pretty easy to not really get to Z. And if you do get to Z and you come back around the corner, you might want to have a discussion with the people that you work with about your time and your boundaries. So this is an example. This is on the same computer, looking at it 2 different ways. One's through terminal, listing it alphabetically, and one's sorting by name. And you can easily see that here, that version 1 and 111 and 10 are all next to each other, and they're sorted by that way. Then comes 12 and then 19, but you know, you come down here and it's like here's 2. So and then the operating system is, you know, is the opposite of that. Like it sorted it right. So just like not even thinking about it, just this is why I prefer alpha and versioning, because this is not even a problem. So your capitalization and marks and white spaces, um, these characters should be avoided. I don't even know if that you can. Most operating systems won't allow you to use these characters. This will just wreak havoc on everything. You could lose everything just putting a $sign in there, transferring it from one file system or another. A lot of these characters are used for programmatic things, and even trying to attempt to name these things is pretty terrible. I don't even like using multiple dots in file names because of how the file system may interpret it. In place of white spaces, I like to use underscores and dashes. I use underscores in place of spaces between 2 different concepts, like between a date and the description. But if you have similar concepts, I'd like to separate them with a dash. This is kind of a personal preference for me, and it's like, so if I was working on a project for, I don't know, Home Depot or AT&T or whatever, and you have multiple different things, like maybe it's like Home Depot dash web app, and then you'd have Home Depot dash iOS, and that would make sense. Whereas completely different ideas are separated with underscores. Just avoid the spaces that can cause problems too. And these are just this is a completely technical thing, but it helps read the file name a lot easier. And camel case is your friend. Being able to stagger your your capitalization makes it easier to read things immediately without making a super long file name. So you can see how much easier it is to read the file name now, and it's got when it was made, what it contains, who made it, and what version it is. So it's really easy to look at it. So now, again, this is for my own personal use, and this is how I do it. I would suggest you find something that works for you. If this doesn't specifically work for you, I mean, I'm a little anal about it because it's just, I've trained myself and I don't think I could do it any other way. And again, I usually save this for project documents, stuff like a logo. I'm not going to name like this because it doesn't make sense. That also comes down to renaming files. One thing is just like when you're going to rename a file, say you get a logo, and you got to think about when you rename the file, like how's it going to affect your workflow and your others' workflow. Like if you completely rename a logo file, like how's that going to affect someone else? Especially like if you get a logo, like say you get the Twitter logo and it's like Twitter -blue.svg, and you make a white version of it, like think that you would probably want to make it Twitter-white.svg, and that's knowing that this is kind of how it was already named. So be very conscious of renaming stock assets. This is super important because you know this comes back to the 1,000 other stock photos that you've downloaded, you know, and you want to put those and you use them all and they're like this, and then you rename it to like Happy Family dash Sunny or Oversaturated or you know whatever. But the thing is that someone's got to purchase that photo. And are they gonna go look through your list of Adobe stock assets to find it? And are you gonna have to go look for it again? Like, because you spent all that time looking for it. Like, why would you rename it? So even if you just keep the numerical order on there or the name on it and you append something to it, that's fine. You could put an underscore AZ-A.PSD and you've edited the file name has changed. You've put ownership on it. You've made it your own, but it still contains the important information about that file when you're going to be using it. And it happens a lot with comps. And the first time I did it and had to go back through that process of looking back at the files, looking back at the stock imagery and be like, oh, I got to go download this and I got to give it to so and so because they have to use their account to buy the file. It's annoying. You could just copy and paste the file name, send it to them, they can buy it. So again, be conscious of that workflow and how that works. Again, with handing off with devs or whatever, it's make their life easier because they'll make your life easier. Document structure. This is a big thing. Is when you're making your document, make sure that you have a hierarchy to your document. For me, I like to think of the document top to bottom, left to right. And when I try to put my layers in that order, I like to, so you can see where things are in the structure of your document easily by just glancing at the list of your layers. It's pretty easy. When this is an actual file on the left from working at Assurant, and I actually had to make this one because I didn't have one that had enough layers in it that were named like this. But I'm sure you've all seen this, and I'm sure you've all created this. We're all guilty of it. It's okay. Admit your mistakes and move on. So, if someone looked at this versus, the other one, there's a huge difference in what you're looking at. Like you automatically know where everything is without even touching anything. And when you have transparent layers and stuff that overlap, and that little hack you had to do to make something look right, where that gradient comes in and then the other gradient comes in, you totally hacked it together because you didn't know the software quite well. Because we're all there. It just didn't do what you wanted to. You did that little hack. So like trying to click down through those layers, trying to find something and pulling it out of the way, you don't have to do that when you name it, because it's there. It's named. You can turn stuff off and find it really quickly. So that will bring us down to Adobe XD. I'll go ahead and share my XD. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll start a web page, right? Because so Adobe XD does a lot of things automatically for you, which is nice. So if you make some text, excuse my typing, and you make your text and you want to set it to get your font ready, because everybody loves Roboto, right? That's the font you're supposed to use. And you go ahead and you add your character style for this, because you should be adding the character style. There's no reason not to, because when you want to use it again, you automatically have it. This is another thing that almost all design software has some form of this or another, where you can set your character styles. Some are deeper than others. A lot of the UX based stuff has a lot less annoying stuff, a lot less kerning, and a lot more important things, like instead of the stuff that InDesign has, which can get super complicated. And you want to try to avoid the complexity, but go ahead, and name this. There's no sense in not naming it, because it's ready to go, right? And it didn't take any much more time than putting it down there. I mean, the small amount of time you spent there, you'll gain back when you need to change something or you need to find something. What's good about XD is that it does keep the name and point size. But if you had a whole list of things in there that was just Roboto and then a point size to something, it would be meaningless to you in relation to your complete document. And that's another thing that's important about it. If someone was to look at this again and they would look over here and said Roboto 209, what is that? Like, what does that represent? And if you go to, if someone asked you a question, someone sitting across from you is like, hey, so what is H1? and you had it labeled Roboto 209. I don't know, like, what are you going to do? Click on it? You could just look at it. And this is a great time to go ahead and think about your color too. One of my favorite colors, 123 ABC, because hex, cool. You can go ahead and add the color. What's good about XD is that it does name it immediately by the hex code. But again, I got a huge print background, so I could look at a CMYK number and be like, oh, I know what color that is. Even RGB I could look at, but the hex I have to do the conversion in my head to get where it is. So I go ahead and label it one thing or another, and this is a point where you can start looking at that you're structuring CSS for someone else. When you're handing this off to a dev, you can speak in normal terms instead of in hex codes. Hex codes are great and all, but you can mistype something. If you mistype dark blue or blue dark or any other way, then it's not misunderstood. Whereas if you misspeak or mistype a hex code, it's completely misunderstood of what it actually is. So naming these things, it could even go to the dev level where they start naming dark blue. And so this is the point of collaboration where you're sitting there and you're talking the same language. And it's not obscure. It's not obscure as a hex code. And even someone can refer to it without knowing the hex code, right? Like, well, what color are we going to make this? Oh, it's our dark blue. And everybody understands that because, again, on the same page. This also allows you to change things. And if you were to have this conversation about a different color, that conversation could be had on the difference instead of saying blue or the hex code. I mean, and you don't have to be backwards like me and put blue light. You could put light blue. I think it'd be perfectly fine. I just kind of do that because it's alphabetical and it's you could categorize them. They automatically get categorized by the color. So you could even have, like, if you had greens or your reds or whatever, putting them in this order kind of puts them in a chromatic order in a way that might not necessarily be that way, because if you add colors, it's usually based on when you added it. So it's really important when you're thinking about it. This way you can have this conversation about blue without being confused on what it is. Dark blue, light blue. You've defined it. You defined the conversation. And even if it hasn't been defined, like, material design, you have, like, your blue 400 or whatever, and that's even defined. You could do it there, but define it. Make sure you have defined it instead of just leaving it. And again, this is stuff that's done up front, and allows you to not think about this again because you've made this choice. And I don't like to think about things twice. So why think about it twice? This goes for buttons as well. This is one of I love this feature. The making rounded corners by actually looking at them instead of typing in numbers is great. So this is a point where you can actually make a component, and again, name it. Say it's button, and then primary. Like, again, this is like it's categorizing it already. So it's a button, and it's your primary button. So when you go look at that, then it's always your primary button. And you know that if you go change that component and you make another one down the road, that when you update that component, that it updates them all. And this is very helpful when you're doing wireframing. Say you're doing a wireframing and it's just a white outline of a button, and you go from one step to the next, and then it's time to do UI work, and you hand it off to someone. Someone could look at the primary button and just and change it, and then it changes across the whole document. You save someone 30 to 45 minutes of going through a 30-page document with a whole bunch of whiteboards and sitting there selecting them individually just to make the UI look great, right? Just because you took 30 seconds to name it and make a component. It's a huge deal. This is the case that you could even, when you go to put your button text down, so you got this solid button. It's okay for you to critique this behind my back. I don't mind. And then at this point, you have a go button, right? And let's go ahead and define the text too. Create a character style, and maybe it's white button text. And then now you have that fine. So again, if a UI person is taking over for your UX, or even for yourself, you're changing colors or trying different things, you can make iterations so fast just because you took a little bit of time of forethought. And this goes down to grouping things. So now that this is grouped, you can see in our layers, and this is really good right here. So you can have your button, then go, right? So you've named it button go. And then even when you go into it, it looks like I double grouped it. But you can see it, and especially when you're searching for it, Sketch allows you to do this, as well as Axure and XD allows you to search for something, right? So you're looking for all your primary buttons that you can search for this individual objects, and this searches over the entirety of all of your artboards. Speaking of artboards, I should have named this first off. So it's okay. You can go back. So it's named. You've named it. Now you can go looking through it, and when it's when you stacked and you have everything down, you can drill through it. And again, when you're looking at a document this easily, you can go, a web application, you can have 30, 40, 50 pages that you've worked months or years on. And you got this huge document, and you're going through each page. It's like, how are you organizing this? Well, how does it make sense? And so even if you're duplicating the page, and it comes out and you got landing page 1, that's not okay. So maybe you have info collection, or whatever you want to name it, and you're going through and you're going to make a text box, right, and text entry box. Go ahead, see rectangle 2, not good enough, make it a form field. Now, and if you're anything like me, that this form field is something that you're going to be using over and over again, and you could easily make a component of it. Right, and so it's named form field. And when you copy it, because you're not gonna recreate it every time. No one does that. I hope not. You're not recreating it each time. But when you copy and paste it, it's this usage of reusing things and knowing that it's each time it's done that way. And when you're going through, and let's say this is your name field. And you name it form field name. And then you have it broken out. And then even if you were to duplicate it, and this is address or whatever, go ahead and change it. You're like form field address. So you can see that your document starts getting a structure to it, and you got reusable things that you can go back to each time that you step through it. And when these little bit of things that you've done up front will help you in the end, because when you're copying fields and stuff, say you made a really cool counter drop down for a certain page and you want to find it again, but you're like, where was that? Where's that specific one that I wanted that had like a date range as well? And you will need to find that component. Going back and searching for those things is so much easier when you can just, type in the name of it, right? Again, this goes back to like naming files. It's like, what would you name it if you were to search for it? But say you just wanted all your form fields, right? So you could find all your form fields in one go. Again, making components so you know what it is. But then this comes down to folder structure too. So with the layers and stuff like here, you've got your text laid out in your form fields. And again, I go from top to bottom, left to right when I'm renaming things. So go ahead and organize it. And this, again, each time you have an iteration or go on to the next component of your thing, of your design, taking these little steps will help you keep the page organized, especially when you come back and you have a hierarchy, so that you know that this is how it should work. This works really well, especially if you're doing file handoff on thinking about accessibility. Now, one thing that's really good about Axure that I like is that you can, if you put your stuff and you stack it in from top to bottom, left to right, your tab functionality can go from one form field to the next. And that's definitely accessibility for people that that can't use a mouse or tabbing through things or with screen readers. So taking this one step, you've decided this, you've set about making something accessible for you, the file, and for the design. So you can lay out things. And when a dev goes and looks at this stuff, they're going to be entering form fields and they're going to be viewing the CSS, and knowing that it stacks this way is that they start building this way. So you're kind of managing upwards of how you want the site to be designed or your application to be designed. So this leads to a lot of other things that you don't have to think about again, because you've already made this design decision, and you don't want to you don't want to do it again. And again, when you're duplicating page after page after page and doing a bunch of different applications, you got screen after screen after screen. This adds up. This adds up considerably on your time. It adds up considerably on your stress. It's again, in case in point with Havana, if I would have gotten a file that was ordered in a way that was understandable and easy, then I wouldn't have to go do a lot of rework, because you can look at it, you can see it, you can see someone's thinking. It's all in there, and you've taken the time to craft this. Plus, you want to look like a badass. I mean, have you ever gotten that Photoshop file or whatever, and you look at it and you're like, damn, who made this? This is awesome, right? And being a design badass is what you want to be, because why else be a designer? You go to MMA or whatever and be a badass there, but you want to be a badass designer. So, do this and take the little time up front to see this. The final thing is that you want to look at is like how do you be an advocate, right? Spread the word, because this only goes so far when you're collaborating with other people. Is that you can do all this work yourself, and it helps you and it helps other people, but you want those people to help you, right? So be an advocate for it. Say talk about it with people, discuss it with your devs, because working with the devs, that having that relationship with the devs has an understanding, so you can have frank conversations. Talk to them about it. What do they need out of it? Create a document. Get your Confluence. Get down, make documents. You're already doing writing. You're doing all the research. You've done all this stuff. Talk to your other designers. Talk with your management. Create a document so that every time that everybody's on the same page, when new people come on, you say, hey, this is how we do things. This is where we put files. This is how we do it. This is how we do deliverables. create a document, really do it. Give a presentation, you know, you can have a fine presentation with a great UX group, and they'll listen to you talk about file names. I mean, who doesn't want to be talked to listen to about file names? I mean, and don't slack on your own projects. Seriously, don't. It's going to be hard at first. It really is, to get in the headspace of just creating, and throwing a rectangle on there, and and doing ellipses, and getting into the mode. But once you add these minor steps to your process, it will make a world of difference for you. If anything, it will lower your stress levels considerably, especially in time constraints, because you're always going to hit those limits. And not having to worry about those things is very helpful for me, and I know it helps other people when they look at it. So Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron.
Yay!
That was great.
Before we go into Q&A, let's all give Aaron a round of applause. Take yourself off mute. By the way, Aaron, your setup looks so good.
Say again?
Your setup looks so good.
All right, I tried so hard. This is not my format, but I can tell you OBS software for streamers is where it's at.
That's awesome. It looked very sharp. You got lots of comments on that if you want to read through the chat. But I know I have questions, but I'll give the room for other people first.
Yeah, go ahead, Sophia.
Oh, Sophia.
I have so many questions. Thanks so much, Aaron. That was awesome. You are an inspiration, truly. So I guess my biggest burning question is, what is your recommendation on depth of foldering? Like folders within folders within folders? Like, do you try to keep a shallow information architecture, or do you go like, let's just create as many folders as possible?
Again, this is very dependent. You think about how you're using it and how you're using it with other people. I think for me, it came about as a need based. Like my folder structure doing graphic design is much smaller than my folder structure for doing UX. I mean, if you have tons of research, break it out. Really do break it out into lots of folders, because it can get really hectic with screenshots, because I know everybody's taking a lot of screenshots, and when you have something named screenshot whatever, like I definitely don't suggest you renaming screenshots. I really don't. But breaking those out into folders, like say you're like, an example was when I was doing some competitive analysis with against Klaviyo. Like I take screenshots, just lots and lots of screenshots, and stick them all in a Klaviyo folder. And maybe it's like Klaviyo email flow or whatever. And you don't want to do it to an extent where it's unusable. But there's definitely, when you start getting things, it starts getting thick, and you start having to look through files over and over again, you might want to think about adding another folder and breaking it down. Take the time out to separate it. So
I mean, you could do it with file naming, right? Like
you could,
like
you
can select a bunch of files and like batch rename them, so that
you could do that.
Shallower structure, instead of like, I just feel like a big part of my life is like going folder inside a folder inside a folder inside a folder.
Well, I mean,
like 30% of my life.
I wouldn't, like, if you're going 5 folders deep, I think you've probably gone too far.
Okay, that's a great rule of thumb. So no more than 5 folders deep.
I mean, 5 folders is a lot, but if you're spending a lot of time digging down through folders, then that I would think about how that experience affects you. It's like if your day is tiring because you're digging through folders all the time, you might not want to do that. So address that problem. You're a UX designer. You should empathize with yourself in the least, right? Because you know that this one thing that you're doing is stressful for you. Change it. Think about, like, how can you improve that?
I don't know how to change.
I mean, just take the time, like, try something different. There's nothing, like, do the testing, right? do some A/B testing, try it 2 different ways.
Okay.
You know, it's okay. But think about like you're doing work up front so you don't have to do it later. Just like the way I think about parenting is like you do all the really, really hard work when they're up to their 5, and then you don't have to do anything else, right? Because I mean, I let my children run wild, but you know, that's a pain point, right? It's a pain point. If it's a pain point, address it, right? That's your job as UX designers, to address pain points. So think of that as, again, it's the philosophy, like, you know, understanding that 5 folders is too deep. You know, you can set that rule if you want to, but is that the philosophy that you want to go by? Is that rule going to work for you? What happens when you need to go to the 6th folder, right?
You gotta put on your own oxygen mask first. You gotta address your own pain points.
Yeah, go for it. I mean,
or you address everybody else.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Well, just a follow-up comment. If Inception taught us anything, you never go too deep.
Yes.
Yep.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, that was great. I did miss the first bit, so hopefully you didn't cover this and I don't look like a fool, but I'm curious how you approach teaching others without coming off as a control freak, because I've already got a bit of a bad rap in my house, being a little bit of OCD, like I color code my books. I'm very anal about my filing. Like I pretty much do everything you are already teaching here, which is good. We have a slightly different naming convention, but I want some more tips on how to teach others without like
like being condescending. Telling Havana that she had a garbage file. No, the biggest thing is to demonstrate it. I think that demonstrate the usage is really helpful. Having a frank conversation when you're working with people, you have that frank conversation. It's okay to say, hey, I'm having problems when collaborating with other people because I get their files and I'm at a loss, right? There's no sense in not having a conversation about it. Like start off with like, how can we make this better, right? Again, it's a yes and, instead of dictating how something should be. Talk to people, have collaboration with people, talk about, hey, what can we do best that when for both of us when we exchange files that this can work better, and build some rules around that collaboration to help you move forward. Because I know there's plenty of people that aren't as anal as I am about this stuff, and I get to name, like, everything's named. I name everything. It's a little tedious, and it may be OCD to some extent, but it's helpful for me. So getting that understanding with someone and collaborating with them instead of dictating to them, I think is important for their buy-in, because not everybody works the same way, right? We all don't work the same way. We all have different workflows. We all manage ourselves differently. So finding a way that you can meet in the middle, and finding that middle point for the collaboration purposes. Like if it comes down to anything that, like, you have 3 basic layers. When I always managed a design group, I was like, you always have to have a text layer, you always have to have an image layer, and you always have to have a background layer. I don't care if you have more than that, but this should be the minimum. This way, when we can look at files, and you can just unlock one file and change the text without having to dig through the file. Find that ground where you can meet, that you're not hindering someone else by your own practices, and they're not hindering you by their practices.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shared thing that you should develop together. Again, this is how I do it. So think about that philosophy as like, how can we make this experience of working together? Again, like, get rid of all that nonsense that you don't want to deal with.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question about Aaron, okay, so in the very beginning, when you're just playing around with concepts and stuff, like when you're just like experimenting, are you still also like naming everything, and how do you not let that slow you down?
Well, there does get to a point where you're just playing around, especially say Havana, you should know is if you're drawing, right, and you're trying to figure things out, and especially if you're putting those logos off to the side, have a sketch space built into your documents. Like this is my sketch space, that you quickly iterate on. Like even if you think of it as your notepad where you're drawing out wireframes or whatever, that might not be the place for sitting there and naming things, because you want to think about the creative process. And so put that into a sketch area of your document if this is going to be your document that's going to move forward. And then when you move those things over to the next thing, that you're moving forward with your design space, start naming those things. Honestly, I would start naming them to begin with in my sketch space, but I understand the need not to, or where that can be cumbersome to do that when you're just drawing little boxes to get an idea of how an interface would look. So just think about that. Set it aside as a sketch space. So especially when you move forward with your document, you can just select that artboard and delete it, because it's not important. Or I have in my Acture documents, like I have sketch space for graphs and stuff, that I like to, that just like it says do not use or do not look at. It's my scratch space that I know that it's not for someone else, it's for my own personal use in it, and I'm not going to name things in there. So setting that space aside is good, or stick it under something named miscellaneous or whatever, so that so it doesn't show as important. It's for your own personal use. It's not for other people, because you're not gonna be doing that. So setting it aside. One thing that Sketch I like that does is when you make components, it kind of puts it in its own little space to the side. I think it's a brilliant idea to think of your components like that. But create that own sketch space is great. Just create an artboard for that, and then when you decide to move forward, then move forward.
Awesome.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's about icon or like illustration files, where icons are used across multiple projects like keynotes, websites, newsletters, and that sort of thing. How do you go about organizing the raw files? Do you organize like all icons in one sketch file, or do you have a separate icon sketch file
You're talking
for
about
each
when
project?
if you're sharing with someone else, or you're
Yes,
like
definitely.
if you're sharing with someone else, they should have the same assets. They should have all the same assets. And if you're definitely using all the same icons, or like if you have a design system, make sure it's defined to the side. Again, this is one case where I think Sketch does a really good job of defining something in a space that's reusable. Even InDesign has the components when you create components in that way. That's great. If you're looking at XD, I definitely download something like a material design set and look at how they're doing it, because you can import those things. But again, if what tool do you normally use when you're speaking this?
Sketch.
Okay, so Sketch does have that component library, right? Like maybe you have your dev kit for your iOS or whatever in that area. I don't see any reason not to put those shared components in that space, because it is a component, and using it like that allows you to update it too. So yeah, if you, I mean, I don't know how many icons you're talking about, but I'm sure it could be a lot.
Lots of icons, lots of graphics.
Yeah, so if you're reusing that stuff, then and everybody's using it, I think it'd be fine to leave it in there. If you're combining things, you might want to think about file size, but otherwise you could have a shared folder on a network of some kind. XD allows you to do Adobe does allow you to do shared libraries, which I think is good in some ways and bad in other ways, because maybe you put something in your library that's not yours. I'm kind of on the fence about the cloud. I think it works great when it works, but I think it's bad when it doesn't. But yeah, putting all those, making everything, all those logos components, I think is a great way to do it. And especially if you're using multiple logos, say you have like an email icon, right? And you're using it in multiple places, using that as a component and be able to update it with everybody else, I think is a great way to create a file. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
Aaron, I've got a question for you. So I also share a print design background, so I can tell a lot of your philosophy is built off of that. I know how important it was with preparing documents before they go to print, right? I'm curious, how has your philosophy changed going from graphic design to product design, and especially with files in the cloud?
The biggest thing is the file structure. The file structure is probably the biggest thing. With print, is for the most part, there's some pre-press stuff that pre-press caveats, I should say, with print that don't, like with transparency layers, that I wouldn't even consider right now. But the biggest thing is the hierarchy of the file is more important with UX and UI work, because it tells the story. And again, it's this accessibility in setting it up and to be able to view things as how it should function, I think is probably the biggest difference with print, because print doesn't care. It's basically what you see is what you get, previewing like that. But it's not necessarily the way that it is with designing digital applications, especially if you're like in the early days of converting print documents into multimedia documents or whatever, where you have a like an ebook kind of thing with multimedia related stuff like video and stuff. That it's very 2010-ish, 2012-ish, that kind of thing. I still don't even think it was that important then when you're making complicated PDFs. So the hierarchy, I think, is really the most important thing about file structure that I learned early, especially when I started using Axure heavily and started noticing that the tab functionality of how things go from one thing and the accessibility of that, and understanding, this is top to bottom. Print's also confined to one space, whereas in digital it's however big or however long you want it to be. You have infinite space.
Thanks for the questions, guys. Keep them coming if you have them.
All right, I have a question. How do you name your artboards? Sometimes it's straightforward, but then like there are different states of the artboard, right? Or in different versions of the artboard. And sometimes there's like simultaneous versions, because I'm giving like different design options that we're reviewing. And sometimes I get so lost about how to.
So like if you have 3 versions of landing page, like there's no problem with landing page A, B, and C. I think it's perfectly fine. Or if you have a different state, name it that state, right? Like this is the landing page with the ubiquitous soft paywall, right? Like name it that, like name it the state it is. I think it's perfectly okay to do that, especially if you don't have if it's in a document that's static and you're not building a prototype. I think it's important to show the different states and name them such. There's how many states are you talking?
Maybe let me rephrase my question. I think so. I tend to order the pages by whatever happy path flow we're trying to figure out.
Yep.
But then it's like, but if let's say there's like 3 states of the landing page, let's say one with no pending actions, one with pending actions, and one with a paywall, whatever. How would I group that in like the structure
in the hierarchy? Usually what I for my structure and how I group it is that I start with the initial state, like nothing's happened, and then branch off the states from there, giving equal value to all of them. Probably happy path top. So if you're thinking of it in tree structure, you'd have this is your default state, right? So this is what happens when nothing else happens, and then you go to this state. So like if you're following your happy path, like this is the normal thing is like from your landing page is your login, right? So your login, and then your you have your landing page, and then your login where you're successful, and then what was your next thing is your failure, right? And then your third thing is like password recheck, or so put it in a hierarchy of that. This is your final state, or this is your initial state, and then what are all the possible states underneath it, instead of giving them equal value, because they don't have equal value. Like one could even be an edge case, right? So you wouldn't want to give your highest value to an edge case, right? So you'd want like what's your happy path, what is the edge case, where's your error, and organize them like that, right? And by importance, again, you want to think about like how would someone else look at this? Like what was the first thing you want them to see? What's important?
Okay, that's really helpful.
Thank you.
I still have questions, but
yeah, I mean, we got time.
Okay. Do you? I know what I do. I'm curious. Do you save all versions of every artboard, or do you just delete them? Like,
well,
iterate. Like
if I iterate, yeah. If you're iterating and you want to like, so my last position, I was the only UX designer, and what I would usually do is that I would version a new file each week. I know on Monday I was definitely making a new file, even if I hadn't made any changes to the next day, because that was like the first thing I would do. And then I would think about it as like, is this a big major change? Because there are times throughout the day that you would go through and you make changes and you think about something, but you haven't delivered it to someone. So why make a new version? Like they're not seeing a new version, so there's no point in delivering it, right? Or changing the file name. So if I'm thinking, if I design something one way and I'm like, I need to make a whole new different change, let's go ahead and save it and make a new version. There's no reason not to. It's hard drive space costs pennies, and it's not really any extra time to make a new version. If you like it, or sometimes you get down this rabbit hole of like, you got this really cool idea, so you want to check it out, like you want to see how this works, and you're like, oh God, that's terrible, and then save it. Why not? Because you've done the work. Save it, version it, move on. Even if you went to another one, yeah. Again, Aaron Draplin says copies are free. It's 100% true. Like, and the thing for me is like, I've thrown away a lot of work over my lifetime. Just doing rebranding with TNT, I probably, I threw away a ton of work, like a year's worth of work, because it didn't make the cut. But it doesn't mean any of that work was bad. So saving it, maybe it's a good idea that you need to revisit, or you move forward and then you find out that idea could work in a different way. There's no reason not to go back to it or know it's there. Again, yeah, those copies of free. Hard drive space is ridiculously cheap. If you run out of hard drive space these days, it's you got other problems besides design problems.
Yeah, that's kind of true. All right, yeah.
I have a question about general advice, and when you enter into like an existing project that is not new, so a team may already have a structure or design file convention in place, but it may not work the best. I know you had said earlier of like working together on it, but is it something where you just kind of start doing it and then showing people like
that happened, that's happened before, going into a job and you start getting files, and I think there's you have that conversation, right? It's important to have that conversation. It may not be a conversation to be had your first day, but when you start working in that space and start seeing that their workflow may be different than yours, but it still works, right? It could work well, it could work better, it could work worse. So making that decision first off, I don't think is something you should do. So working in that system, and again, this is your point of discovery, right? You got a new job. So you can sit there and you can go to discovery and see and find those pain points, start talking to people about those pain points, start working towards something that's better. If anything, when you start a new file, name it how you want to. You've started the project yourself. There's no reason not to name it. Now, if they have their own conventions, again, have that conversation. There's no reason that someone doesn't want to make their life easier. And if you get pushback, I hope you wouldn't. In a space where you want to be collaborative, just talk about it. Learn about their system first before you start trying to change it. There could be improvements, and if you see it's garbage, just you could write a document and submit it to leadership and say, this is what I'm talking about. Set a meeting about it. Like, you've run into these problems, do it again. Have the conversation. It doesn't hurt. If anything, it'll make things better. But yeah, those systems are always going to exist. They're always going to exist before you, unless you get lucky and you're the first person at a company doing anything and you can decide. I doubt that would ever happen. But it's have the conversation again. Collaborate. This is your job too. You have to work there. So doing something that doesn't work for you is I don't think is viable.
Okay. And then I had a second question of like, have you had experience using any design file versioning tools, and how does that impact your philosophy?
I have not. I wish there was something like GitHub to do that, that can control the versioning. It would be nice. I have not used any design tools that allow that. I've used some of the things that are kind of built into Adobe products and with Axure, and I found them to be clunky and not versatile enough. I'll make a note about Abstract, but yeah, I haven't tried any of those. Maybe I'm just too old my ways.
I know from my own experience and the experience of other people I know in UX, Abstract can be really buggy. So that's one of the things you have to probably be on the lookout for. I know in Figma you can do save points, which is pretty nice because you're almost like doing version control for your files. So that's one thing that was one of the things that I liked about switching over to Figma for that reason.
Yeah, well, Figma's really great on the collaboration side, especially. You can design along with people. You can sit there and start naming stuff for yourself and be like, yeah, I'm naming stuff, you're not.
Yeah, I just found the save point. It's very useful. Yeah.
Aaron, how do you utilize pages in your files? And also, like, how do you decide how you use pages if you're using a specific software that doesn't offer pages like Adobe XD?
If I don't necessarily use pages. It depends on, again, that's it's something where as your project grows, I think it's important just to be able to condense things at one go. I like grouping things, which is important. But with the pages, that I would say it's when your document gets really large. And then the choice of using pages for separate flows is not a bad idea either, to see one way to the other. I like looking at everything as a whole. So if I can't do that, then I get a little lost in it personally.
Yeah. Do you have other I guess other triggers that help you decide if you're going to separate something into a new file versus just the naming conventions that you have?
Well, the biggest thing is my stress level, right? I keep if I find that I'm doing something that's not working for me, change it, right? It's okay to change directions in the middle of doing something. If you see that your project is so big that you can't manage it, you need to break it off into different pieces. I think it's perfectly okay to do that. If you're working on a project with someone else and you could have different files, and I think that's perfectly okay. Again, find your pain points, and when you hit those pain points, change it. Because if you're seeing that you're coming across the same thing over and over again, then you don't want to, if it's really, really annoying for you to dig through a file every single time you use it, or your file size gets so large that it becomes unmanageable with like your technical limitations of the computer you're working on. Or when you open it up, it opens up to the same thing every single time, and you have to look at the same thing and then go to the same page that you want to. I don't, change it.
Thank you, Erin. We're going to start wrapping up soon. We did have one question come through the chat that we wanted to ask from Carrie. And she was asking, when you were speaking about versioning, she wants to know if you version differently for things that clients see versus a change that's made internally. And so like when a client is seeing it. I think
No, I don't. Mm-hmm. I honestly, I don't. I version everything the same way. I don't. If the client sees that it's 10 versions later, it's what different does it make? The thing with that is like, if you send someone, say you send someone a PDF or some screenshots of a version, right? And then you email it to them and they get it and they're like, well, I like this layout, and you look at it and you find out that they've looked at a version that's three versions old. I think that's important to have those same things to correlate moving forward, because that came up a lot in the print world, and it comes up in this world too, is that if you're looking at two different things, then you're not speaking the same language. So keeping that the same, I would definitely never version differently for someone else. It's just that I don't think there's any value in it. If someone wants to rename your file, if you like have a account executive or someone that's renaming your files, I would try to put a kibosh on that if you could, because maybe they do it for for appearance reasons, like saying, hey, we didn't go through this, or the billing, and I don't think it's okay to mess with your workflow in that manner, because that separates like what you're looking at. And so I would, again, with the clients, send them the same version. Your client's not going to care what it says. They're going to look at it, and they're going to look at the content. The file name is irrelevant to them.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie, for asking that question. Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more before we end for the evening. If anybody has just one other question you'd like to ask, if you need to leave, that's fine too. We're just gonna hang out here for just a bit, but the floor is open for one final question for Erin. All right, I think we're good. I think that was amazing, and thank you so much for joining us tonight, Erin. Thank you all.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to all of our attendees. Don't forget about our next event, Taming Your Redesigned Dragon. Sign up for that at our meetup. I can't remember the date off the top of my head. Terrible organizer, but yeah. Thank you guys so much, and we will be here next month. Organizers, if you could stick around, and Erin as well, we can regroup, and everybody else have a good night. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time.